The air was thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, burning fuel, and the metallic tang of blood. The Velker black market was a rotting wound in the fabric of the galaxy, a place where morality had long since been discarded in favor of profit. It thrived in the shadows of lawless space, hidden in the belly of a derelict station orbiting a dying star. Here, everything had a price: guns, technology, stolen artifact from lost civilizations. And people. Lyrian had long since learned not to look at the faces of those who passed her cage. The first time she had met the eyes of a potential buyer, she had seen nothing but hunger staring back at her. Some had gazed at her with curiosity, others with amusement, but all of them had looked at her as if she were less than a person. She had been paraded before warlords and crime lords, slavers and collectors, each weighing her value in credits. She had lost count of how many times she had wished for death. She barely remembered the night the RYX cartel came to her world. Selvara had been a civilization of peace, a race who had built towering crystal cities that sang in the wind, their people artists, poets, dreamers. Their wisdom was ancient, their knowledge sought after by scholars across the galaxy. But wisdom had not saved them when the RYX arrived. They hadn't come to negotiate or conquer. They had come to harvest. Lyrian remembered the sound of the ships descending, darkening the violet sky of her homeworld. She remembered the way their warriors moved like shadows, striking down her people with cruel efficiency. Their weapons had torn through the Selvara as if they were nothing more than fragile sculptures made of glass. And when the screaming had stopped, the survivors, those deemed valuable, had been shackled and thrown into transport ships like livestock. The rest had been left to rot beneath the ruins of their once great cities. Now, she was nothing but a rare specimen, a prize for the highest bidder. The cage was small, barely large enough for her to sit without her knees pressing against the cold metal bars. Her wings, once a magnificent cascade of black feathers shimmering with violet and deep blue, were now dull, broken, half-plucked by her captors. She had been beaten for trying to fight back, shocked for refusing to sing when ordered, starved for showing defiance. She had learned her lessons well. Now, she remained still, her long black hair falling in tangled waves over her shoulders, hiding the once brilliant glow of her golden eyes. Her deep violet skin, once smooth and flawless, was now marred with bruises and healing cuts. She felt the slaver's presence before she heard him. The thick, greasy stench of his sweat mixed with the acrid scent of old blood as he leaned against the bars of her cage, fingers tapping lazily against the metal. "Still breathing, bird?" His voice was a sickly sweet drawl, full of mockery. "Thought you might have given up by now." Lyrian didn't answer. She had learned long ago that silence was safer. The slaver, Kars, grinned, his yellowed teeth flashing under the dim red glow of the overhead lights. He was a hulking brute of a man, his leathery skin covered in ritual scars, his cybernetic eye glowing faintly as he scanned her, assessing whether she had lost any more of her value. "She's still in fine condition," he muttered to himself, running a thick, calloused finger along his jaw. Then, louder, "I'd say today's your lucky day, girl. Got a few interested buyers coming in. You'd best look presentable." Lyrian clenched her fists. She had long since abandoned the foolish hope of someone coming to save her. The universe did not rescue those like her. There was no Selvara fleet coming to reclaim her people. No hidden allies plotting to overthrow the RYX cartel. She had accepted the truth. She was alone. The market was growing louder, the hum of conversations mixing with the distant clang of machinery and the occasional sharp cry of someone learning the consequences of disobedience. And then something changed. A presence entered the market. Not just another warlord or slaver. Not another collector searching for an exotic addition to their menagerie. This one was different. She sensed it before she saw him. A ripple in the suffocating air of the market. A shift in the careful balance of power that no one else seemed to notice. Then he stepped into view. A man, taller than most, broad-shouldered, his posture relaxed but controlled, like a predator at rest. His clothes were worn but practical, the kind of gear meant for surviving in hostile places. His face was shadowed beneath the low hood of his jacket, but she caught the sharp edge of a strong jaw, the hint of a scar cutting across his cheekbone. His eyes, though cold, sharp, assessing, cut through the haze of the market like a blade. He wasn't browsing. He was looking for something. His gaze flickered over the cages, the twisted displays of suffering and subjugation that made up the beating heart of Velker. His expression didn't change, but there was a tightness in his jaw, a tension in his shoulders. And then he saw her. For a brief second, everything else vanished. Their eyes met. Lyrian had expected the same look she had seen 100 times before. Curiosity, amusement, hunger. But what she saw instead made her breath catch. Rage, not the sadistic, gleeful kind that the slavers wielded so easily. This was controlled, quiet, cold as the void between stars. And it was aimed at them, not her. A slow, sickening grin spread across Kars's face. You've got good taste, my friend, he said, stepping forward. Selvara female. Beautiful, isn't she? Rare find. Smart. Even sings. The man, Stu, didn't react immediately. His gaze lingered on her for a fraction of a second longer before shifting to Kars. How much? Lyrian's stomach twisted. She had seen this play out before. A buyer would negotiate, credits would exchange hands, and she would be owned once again. Stu didn't look at her again, but there was something in the way his fingers flexed at his sides, the way his weight shifted slightly, as if he were preparing for something. Kars chuckled. Expensive. 500,000 credits. A muscle in Stu's jaw tightened. Lyrian barely breathed. Something was wrong. The way he carried himself, the barely restrained tension in his stance. He wasn't here as a buyer. He was here for something else. And for the first time in years, a thought took root in her mind. Could this be different? Could this be the moment everything changed? And if it was, what the hell was he planning? Stu didn't react immediately to the slaver's price. He just stood there, his expression unreadable, his posture loose but controlled. To anyone watching, he might have seemed indifferent, just another buyer considering his options. But Lyrian saw the flicker of tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened ever so slightly. Something about him felt different from the others who had come before. Kars, the slaver, leaned against the cage, his cybernetic eye whirring as he scanned Stu's face. 500,000's a bargain for something this rare, he continued, his tone oozing with self-satisfaction. Selvara don't come cheap, my friend, especially not ones that still got a bit of fight left in him. His fingers drummed lazily against the bars. She'll make a fine servant. Or maybe something a little more personal. Stu's gaze didn't waver, but something in the air around him shifted. Lyrian wasn't sure what it was at first, only that it sent a slow chill down her spine. A moment later, she recognized it. Danger. It wasn't something as simple as anger. She had seen anger before, felt it, lived beneath its cruelty. This was something colder, something sharp and calculated, like a blade sliding free from its sheath. Stu's fingers flexed once, then relaxed. You got a holding area? His voice was casual, uninterested, as if the whole conversation was little more than a business transaction. Not many buyers walk away with their merchandise right away. I imagine you keep them somewhere secure before the credits clear. Kars grinned, clearly taking the bait. Of course. You think I just let high-value stock sit out in the open? He barked out a laugh, gesturing toward the rows of cages, each holding some poor soul waiting for their fate. This is just for show. The real inventory's locked up tight in the back. Stu nodded slowly, as if considering his options. I'll think about it, he said, then turned and walked away. Lyrian felt something inside her tighten. That was it. He was leaving? Kars watched Stu disappear into the crowd, then turned back to her with a smirk. See that bird? Another one who wants you, but won't pay up. Eventually, someone will. He reached through the bars, grabbed a fistful of her hair, and jerked her head up. And when they do, you better pray they're not worse than me. She didn't flinch. She had no prayers left. Stu moved through the winding corridors of the Velker black market with a purpose, his mind working through every possible angle. He hadn't planned on this. He had come here for information, not for a rescue mission. But the second he'd locked eyes with her, he'd known. He wasn't leaving without her. That wasn't some lost, broken creature in that cage. She still had something left in her. A spark, a fight, and damn it, if the universe had already decided to crush her, he wasn't about to let it. But 500,000 credits? Not a chance. Even if he had that kind of money, he wouldn't put it in the hands of slavers. Which meant there was only one option. He had to steal her. He spent the next hour gathering intel, listening, observing. He learned where the slavers moved their stock, how many guards patrolled the holding areas, and, most importantly, where the control station for the shot callers was located. Without disabling that, she'd be dead before they even got out the door. By the time he was done, he had a plan. It was reckless. It was messy, but it was going to work. Lyrian sat in the darkness of her cage, her body aching from hours of stillness. The market had quieted slightly, though it never truly slept. Some of the buyers had left, and the slavers had begun moving the more valuable captives to the secure holding areas for the night. Soon, they would come for her. Her fingers curled into the fabric of the thin, tattered cloth they had given her to wear. She had no reason to believe anything would change. Hope was a cruel thing, one she had long since buried. But still, something about that man lingered in her thoughts. She had seen buyers hesitate before, but not like that. His interest hadn't been in owning her. She had felt it. He had looked at her like he was evaluating something, like he was planning something. A commotion broke out near the far end of the market. Raised voices, the sound of something heavy crashing to the floor. A few of the slavers muttered in annoyance, but no one seemed particularly alarmed. Fights weren't uncommon in a place like this. Then, the lights flickered. A pulse of energy surged through the air, momentarily disrupting the hum of the shock collars and containment fields. It was subtle, so fast that most of the slavers didn't even notice. But she noticed. Her collar, once a constant, burning weight against her throat, stopped humming. For the first time in years, Lyrian could take a full breath without the ever-present threat of pain. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She knew, with absolute certainty, that man hadn't left, and whatever he was about to do, it had already started. The lights flickered again, then died completely, plunging the Velker black market into chaos. For a moment, everything stilled. The constant hum of power that had filled the air since the moment Lyrian was thrown into this prison was suddenly gone. The electronic locks, the shock collars, the energy barriers, all of it silenced in an instant. Then, like the breaking of a dam, the chaos erupted. Shouts of confusion rang through the market as slavers and guards scrambled to regain control. Buyers barked orders, hands reaching for weapons, while the captives, many too weak or broken to even recognize what was happening, huddled in their cages, unsure whether to hope or fear what came next. Lyrian barely breathed. For the first time in years, the metal ring around her throat wasn't buzzing with barely restrained pain. The weight of it still pressed against her skin, a cruel reminder of its purpose, but the threat it carried was gone. She should have been terrified. Instead, for the first time in so long, she felt something else. Anticipation. And then she saw him. Stu moved like a shadow in the dark. He was precise, controlled, every motion calculated. A figure born from war, not from the filth of this market. His weapon, a crackling energy blade, unstable and vicious, cut through the first guard with sickening ease. The man collapsed before he even had time to scream. Lyrian pressed herself against the bars, watching as chaos unfolded around him. A second guard rushed forward, blaster raised, too slow. Stu twisted, slashing downward, and the man's blaster clattered to the ground, his body following a second later. Someone screamed. The slavers were realizing what was happening. Lyrian barely had time to react before Cars, the grotesque brute who had paraded her like a prize, stormed toward the fight, his cybernetic arm whirring as he drew a heavy baton from his belt. Stu didn't hesitate. He moved to intercept, dodging to the side as Cars swung. The baton smashed into the cage beside Lyrian's head, sending a jolt of vibration through the metal bars. For the first time, Cars looked worried. "You should have walked away," he growled. Stu just tilted his head slightly. "Yeah, I get that a lot." Cars lunged again, but Stu was faster. He twisted, slamming an elbow into Kars's throat, forcing the slaver to stumble back, choking. Before Kars could recover, Stu reached forward, grabbed the collar of his shirt, and slammed him into the bars of Lyrian's cage so hard that the entire structure rattled. The impact sent a shock through Lyrian's body, but she didn't flinch. Not this time. Keys, Stu ordered, his voice ice cold. Kars spat blood, snarling. Go to hell. Stu didn't break eye contact. He simply tightened his grip and twisted Kars's cybernetic wrist until metal groaned and wires sparked. The slaver howled. Lyrian felt something cold and dark coil in her chest. Not fear, not even hope. Satisfaction. Kars fumbled for the keyring at his belt with his good hand, his face twisted in pain. He yanked it free and shoved it towards Stu, who snatched it without a word. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Lyrian didn't move. Not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. It was too surreal. The open door, the absence of her collar's hum, the slaver at Stu's feet, writhing in agony. For so long, escape had been nothing more than a dream. A cruel joke she didn't dare believe in. Stu didn't waste time. He tossed the keyring aside, his storm gray eyes locking onto hers. Can you walk? She swallowed. Her throat was dry, her voice weaker than she wanted it to be. Yes. Then move. He turned, already scanning the chaos for threats. She hesitated for just a heartbeat longer before stepping forward. Out of the cage, out of the prison she had lived in for years. And for the first time in forever, she was free. But there was no time to celebrate. The market was an absolute pandemonium. Some slavers were already scrambling to restore power. Others were too busy trying to contain prisoners who had realized what was happening. The weaker captives cowered, unsure whether to fight or flee, while the few who still had any fight left were struggling against their restraints. But none of that mattered, because the RYX enforcers had arrived. A group of heavily armed guards poured in from the main entrance, their black armor glinting under the emergency lights. Their weapons were already drawn. Shit, Stu muttered. He grabbed Lyrian's wrist, not painfully, but firmly, and pulled her forward. Move. She obeyed. The next few minutes blurred into a frantic chase through the back corridors of the market. Stu knew exactly where he was going, maneuvering through narrow service tunnels and abandoned storage areas with the confidence of someone who had already memorized the entire layout. Lyrian struggled to keep up. Her body screamed in protest. Her muscles were weak from confinement, her balance unsteady. Every step sent fire lancing through her legs, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't. ARYX soldier rounded the corner ahead, blaster raised. Stu didn't break stride. He lifted his own weapon, a compact blaster pistol, and fired once. A clean, precise shot. The enforcer crumpled before he even knew what hit him. They kept running. Lyrian's lungs burned, her vision swimming as exhaustion clotted her. Just as her legs threatened to give out, Stu suddenly yanked her to the left, dragging her into a dark, narrow passageway barely wider than her shoulders. She pressed against the cold metal wall, struggling to catch her breath. Stu sealed the hatch behind them, exhaling slowly. For the first time since they started running, the world was quiet. Lyrian slid down the wall, trying to control her shaking limbs. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and now everything hurt. Stu crouched beside her, checking his weapon. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, finally, he asked, "Why the hell are you still alive?" Lyrian blinked, caught off guard. "What?" He glanced at her, frowning slightly. "The others. The ones like you. They're either broken or dead. But not you." He tilted his head. "Why? She should have been dead." She knew that. She had seen stronger Selvaara break completely under less. So why had she survived? She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I refused to disappear." Stu studied her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he gave a short, approving nod. "Good. That was it. No sympathy, no unnecessary words. Just acknowledgement. And somehow, that meant more than anything else." He stood, extending a hand. "We need to keep moving." She hesitated, then took it. Stu pulled her to her feet, steadying her when she nearly collapsed. He didn't let go until she found her balance. Then, without another word, they slipped deeper into the tunnels, two fugitives racing toward an uncertain future. The tunnels beneath the Velker black market were a labyrinth of rusted steel and forgotten passageways, built long before the station became a hub for criminals and slavers. The walls were damp with condensation, the air thick with the scent of old oil and stagnant water. Lyrian could hear the distant hum of machinery far above them, the echo of muffled shouts and hurried footsteps as the market's enforcers scrambled to restore order. She kept moving, forcing her body to obey despite the sharp protests of muscles long deprived of real movement. Every step sent jolts of pain through her legs, but she pushed forward, knowing that slowing down meant death, or worse. Stu moved ahead, his steps silent but purposeful, pausing every few moments to listen. His weapon remained drawn, his shoulders tense. He wasn't running blindly. He had a plan. Lyrian hadn't asked what it was yet. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. She focused on breathing, on keeping her limbs from trembling. The collar was still around her neck, the cold metal a lingering reminder of what she had been. But it no longer hummed with the promise of pain. That at least was something. The tunnel opened into a wider corridor, lined with old supply crates and broken equipment. Stu stopped, turning to face her. "We don't have long," he said. "They'll regroup and send more after us. We need to get to my ship before they lock down the docks." She nodded, swallowing hard. "How far?" Stu hesitated. "Too far to walk." He exhaled sharply, glancing down at her. "And you're not going to make it much farther like this." Lyrian clenched her jaw, straightening despite the sharp pull of exhaustion in her body. "I can keep up." His gray eyes flickered over her, assessing, but he didn't argue. Instead, he turned back to the crates, rummaging through them until he pulled out a small, sleek device, a stolen comm unit, most likely. He activated it with a flick of his thumb. "Mara, you there?" Static crackled, then a voice cut through. "Stu, what the hell is going on down there?" "Long story," he muttered. "I need an extraction. You in the air?" "Barely," the woman, Mara, replied. "Station's on high alert. They just put all outgoing ships on lockdown." Lyrian's stomach twisted. "A lockdown? If they couldn't get out?" "I need you to find a way to override it," Stu said, his voice low, controlled. "We're in the lower tunnels. Meet us at the old service port, Bay 14. Mara let out a string of curses. "You're gonna get me shot." You say that like it'd be the first time. A pause, then a sigh. "Fine, I'll figure something out. You got 10 minutes before they start sealing blast doors." Stu shut off the comm and turned back to Lyrian. "We need to move. Now." She followed, keeping pace as best she could. Every step felt heavier than the last, but she refused to let it slow her down. Not now. Not when she was finally moving towards something other than another cage. The air grew colder as they moved deeper into the tunnels. The station's artificial gravity fluctuated in places, making her steps feel momentarily weightless before pressing down again. Her breath was ragged, but she didn't stop. Then, ahead, Stu froze. Lyrian barely had time to react before he grabbed her and shoved her against the wall, pressing a finger to his lips. Footsteps. Heavy. Close. Armed. She held her breath as shadows moved just beyond the turn ahead. Voices, gruff, irritated, speaking in low tones. "Escape through here, no doubt." "You sure?" The collar signal went dead. The moment the power cut out, she was gone. A pause. Then, the distinct click of a weapon being primed. "Orders are to bring her back alive. If we can't, we put her down." Lyrian's throat tightened. She had always known there would be no true escape, not without a fight. Stu's fingers brushed her wrist, a silent message. "Stay quiet. Stay still." Then, without a sound, he moved. The first guard didn't even see him coming. Stu grabbed him from behind, clamping a hand over his mouth as his knife drove deep between the man's ribs. A sharp, wet sound, then silence. The second guard barely had time to react before Stu fired once, dropping him instantly. Lyrian exhaled, her chest tightening. She had seen men die before, but this? Stu barely spared the bodies a glance before stepping over them. "Come on." She followed, stepping carefully to avoid the growing pool of blood beneath the guards. By the time they reached the service hatch leading to Bay 14, her legs were shaking. Stu pried the hatch open, revealing a dimly lit maintenance tunnel. A gust of cold air rushed past them, carrying the distant scent of fuel and metal. Beyond this tunnel, freedom waited. Lyrian hesitated, not because she wanted to stay, never that, but because something about this moment felt too big, too real. She had spent so long waiting, enduring, surviving. She had imagined freedom 1,000 different ways, but she had never imagined what came after. Stu must have seen it on her face because he paused, eyes narrowing. "You good?" She forced herself to nod. "Yeah." A long pause. Then he nodded once and offered his hand. Lyrian looked at it. Then, slowly she took it. His grip was warm, steady, real. "Let's get the hell out of here," he said. And together they ran toward freedom. The tunnel walls vibrated with the distant echoes of alarms, a mechanical wail that pulsed through the station like a dying heartbeat. Lyrian's breath came in short, uneven gasps, her muscles burning with the kind of exhaustion that went beyond the physical. Every step sent fresh jolts of pain through her body, but she kept moving, kept running. She had spent years in a cage. She would not let herself be caught now. Stu led the way, moving with practiced precision, his blaster drawn and ready. He didn't hesitate, didn't slow, every decision calculated, every movement deliberate. Lyrian struggled to keep up, but she refused to slow him down. Not now. Not when freedom was so close. The tunnel sloped downward, opening into a vast docking bay. The emergency lights flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows across the cargo crates and fuel tanks that lined the space. And there, at the far end, their way out, Stu's ship. It was smaller than she expected, sleek and compact, its reinforced hull painted matte black. The loading ramp was already down, waiting. Just a few more meters. A blaster shot seared past her head, close enough that she felt the heat on her cheek. They had found them. Stu spun instantly, raising his weapon. Lyrian barely had time to duck before he fired, his shot slamming into the nearest enforcer. The man collapsed before he could even return fire. More were coming. A lot more. Heavy boots thundered against the metal floor as our YX enforcers poured into the docking bay, their sleek black armor gleaming under the red emergency lights. They were faster, better armed, and they were closing in fast. Lyrian's stomach twisted. She knew what happened to runaways who got caught. Stu fired again, taking down another enforcer before grabbing Lyrian's wrist. "Move." She didn't need to be told twice. They sprinted toward the ship, dodging between crates as plasma fire erupted around them. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning metal, the sharp sting of ozone. Lyrian's legs screamed in protest, but she forced herself to keep going. The ramp was just ahead. They could make it. Then, out of nowhere, an enforcer stepped into their path. Lyrian barely had time to react before the man lunged at Stu, a brutal shock baton swinging toward his head. Stu dodged at the last second, twisting as he drove an elbow into the enforcer's throat. The man staggered back, choking just enough of an opening for Stu to slam his blaster into his temple. The enforcer collapsed instantly, but the delay had cost them. More enforcers were closing in, weapons raised. Stu grabbed Lyrian's shoulder and shoved her toward the ramp. "Go!" She stumbled but obeyed, scrambling up the ramp just as the enforcers opened fire. Blaster bolts hissed through the air, slamming into the ship's hull as she threw herself inside. Stu was right behind her, firing one last shot before slamming the hatch shut. For a moment, there was only the sound of their breathing, the distant roar of the engines spooling to life. Then the ship lurched violently upward. Lyrian collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. Her entire body ached, her arms trembling as she struggled to push herself upright. They had made it. She felt it before she processed it. A warmth, steady and solid, grounding her. Stu's hands. She hadn't even realized he was holding her, his grip firm but careful, keeping her from sliding back down onto the floor. He was crouched in front of her, close, too close, his storm gray eyes scanning her face for injuries. Lyrian's breath caught. No one had ever looked at her like that before. Not with concern, not with quiet, restrained intensity. His thumb brushed against the inside of her wrist, and she flinched, not from fear, but from the unfamiliarity of it. Stu immediately let go, as if realizing what he had done. For a split second, neither of them moved. Then he cleared his throat and stood, offering her a hand. "You good?" Lyrian hesitated before taking it. His palm was rough, calloused, but his grip was careful, strong without being forceful. He pulled her up easily, steadying her when her legs nearly gave out. A sharp voice crackled over the ship's intercom. "All right, are we going to talk about how I just pulled off the best damn getaway in history, or—" Stu sighed heavily and pressed the comm panel. "Mara." Lyrian turned toward the cockpit as the ship pitched sideways, dodging something unseen. The woman at the controls, Mara, Stu's pilot, was gripping the controls with a mix of irritation and pure adrenaline. "Before you ask," Mara continued, her tone laced with sarcasm, "yes, we're being followed. And yes, it's the cartel. And yes, if we don't jump to hyperspace in about 30 seconds, we're dead." Stu ran a hand down his face. "Of course we are." Mara twisted to glance back at them. Her sharp eyes landed on Lyrian for the first time. For a second, her expression shifted. Not pity, not curiosity, recognition. Then she sighed and turned back to the controls. "Hope she's worth all this, Stu." Lyrian's chest tightened. She had heard that before. "Hope she's worth the trouble. Hope she's worth the price." Except this time, it wasn't coming from someone who wanted to own her. It was coming from someone who had risked everything to save her. Stu's response was immediate, sharp. "She is." Lyrian's heart stuttered. He said it without hesitation, like it wasn't even a question. Mara didn't push, but something unreadable passed over her face as she muttered under her breath and flipped a switch. The ship shuddered violently then, a deafening roar as the stars stretched into infinity, and they were gone. For the first time in years, Lyrian wasn't trapped. She was somewhere else. The silence that followed was almost too much. The alarms were gone. The gunfire. The screaming. All that remained was the soft hum of the ship and the steady sound of Stu's breathing beside her. She realized she was still holding onto his arm. Slowly, she let go. He didn't move away immediately. For a moment, just a moment, she thought he might say something. Instead, he exhaled, running a hand through his hair before stepping back. "Get some rest," he said. "We're not done yet." Lyrian watched him go, something unfamiliar twisting in her chest. Something dangerous. Something that felt a little too much like hope. The ship's engines hummed softly, a steady, rhythmic pulse that filled the quiet. The transition into hyperspace had been smooth, leaving behind the chaos of Velker, the blaring alarms, the gunfire. For the first time in years, Lyrian wasn't running, but the weight in her chest hadn't lifted. She sat on the floor of the cargo bay, back against the cold metal wall, her knees pulled to her chest. Her breathing had evened out, but her body still trembled, not from exhaustion, not from pain, but from the overwhelming, crushing reality of what had just happened. She was free. The words should have felt like salvation. Instead, they felt like something sharp and too big to grasp all at once. She still felt the phantom pressure of the collar at her throat, the ever-present hum of the shock mechanism that had dictated every breath she took. Her fingers ghosted over her skin, expecting the sting, the pulse of pain that never came. It wasn't real anymore, but her body hadn't figured that out yet. Across the cargo hold, Stu sat on a supply crate, arms resting on his knees, watching her in silence. He hadn't spoken since they boarded, hadn't asked if she was okay. He didn't have to, because he knew. She could feel his gaze, steady, assessing, unreadable. Not the kind of look she was used to. Not one of appraisal. Not one of ownership. It was something else entirely. Something she didn't know how to handle. Lyrian took a slow breath and forced herself to meet his eyes. "What now?" Stu exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. He looked as exhausted as she felt, but it wasn't a physical tiredness. It was older, worn into him over time. "We lay low," he said. "Mara's taking us off-grid for a while. The Arwythe cartel won't let this go, and I don't feel like getting shot in my sleep." Lyrian swallowed hard. She had known the cartel wouldn't stop hunting her, but hearing it spoken so plainly made her stomach twist. "They'll come after you, too," she said. "Because of me." Stu didn't blink. "I know." The words settled between them, heavy and undeniable. Lyrian clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "You didn't have to do this." Stu tilted his head slightly, watching her in that quiet way of his. "Yeah, I did." She narrowed her eyes. "Why?" He leaned back slightly, his posture still relaxed, but there was something guarded in the way his fingers flexed against his knee. "I don't like slavers," he said simply. It wasn't enough. Lyrian shook her head. "That's not an answer." Stu exhaled through his nose, his gaze flicking to the floor for a fraction of a second before locking onto hers again. He didn't look away, not like someone who was lying, but like someone who was debating how much of himself he wanted to give. Finally, he said, "I know what it's like to be trapped in something you can't escape from." The words weren't dramatic, weren't weighted with self-pity, but Lyrian felt the impact of them like a punch to the ribs. She knew that feeling. She had lived it. The difference was Stu had gotten out. Her throat tightened. She wanted to ask what had happened, who he had been before he became this hardened, sharp-edged man sitting in front of her. But she didn't, because she knew that kind of pain didn't come with simple answers. So instead, she said the only thing that felt true. "I don't know how to be free." The admission slipped out before she could stop it, raw and far too real. Stu didn't react right away, didn't soften, didn't rush to reassure her. He just studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he said, "You don't have to know. You just have to start." Lyrian blinked, caught off guard by the quiet certainty in his voice. Start. That was what this was, wasn't it? A beginning. Not the end of her fight, but the first step into something unknown. The realization should have been terrifying, but for the first time it wasn't. It was something else entirely. Hope. The intercom crackled to life, breaking the moment. Mara's voice filtered through, sharp and edged with exasperation. "All right, I know you two are probably brooding in separate corners of the ship or whatever, but we have a problem." Stu closed his eyes briefly, like he was summoning patience, then pressed the comm panel. "What now?" Mara huffed. "We're being tracked." Lyrian's stomach dropped. Stu's expression darkened instantly. "Ow! Your guess is as good as mine," Mara said. "The cartel isn't usually this fast, which means one of two things. Either they tag your ship without us knowing, or someone sold us out." Lyrian's skin went cold. Stu stood, already moving toward the cockpit. "How much time do we have?" "An hour. Maybe less," Mara answered. "We need a plan before we drop out of hyperspace, or we're dead." Lyrian pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the way her muscles protested. She wasn't hiding anymore. Stu glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You coming?" he asked. She held his gaze, steady this time. Yes. For the first time, the decision was hers to make, and she wasn't going to let it be her last. The steady hum of hyperspace filled the silence, a low vibration thrumming beneath Lyrian's skin. She stood at the edge of the cockpit, arms crossed, trying to push down the unease that curled in her stomach. She wasn't used to having choices. She wasn't used to standing instead of kneeling, to watching the stars instead of the cold, metallic walls of a cage. And she sure as hell wasn't used to being hunted because someone had fought for her. Stu stood beside Mara at the controls, his arms crossed, his expression carved from stone as he studied the navigation panel. The blue glow of hyperspace streaked across his face, casting his features in sharp relief. He was quiet, too quiet, but Lyrian could see the tension in his stance, in the way his fingers tapped against his forearm in slow, measured beats. He was calculating, planning, because something was wrong. Mara leaned back in her chair, letting out a frustrated sigh as she kicked her boots up onto the dashboard. "All right, so the bad news is we're definitely being tracked." Stu exhaled sharply. "And the good news? There's no good news." Lyrian's grip on her arms tightened. "How did they find us so fast?" Mara shrugged, but her usual sarcasm was gone. Only two ways they could have done it. Either someone on Velker tipped them off, or, Stu asked. Mara flicked a few switches, pulling up a screen filled with shifting data streams. Or they tagged you. Lyrian's blood turned to ice. She looked at Stu instinctively, but his expression didn't change. His gaze remained locked on the screen, cold and focused. What do you mean? Lyrian asked, her throat tightening. Mara gestured vaguely in Stu's direction. I mean, if they wanted her back, they would have planned for failure. Slavers always have contingency plans. They might have planted a tracker on you during the fight. Hell, it could be in your gear, your weapon. Stu's jaw tensed. I would have noticed. Mara tilted her head. Would you? For the first time, something sharp flickered in Stu's expression, but it was gone just as fast, buried beneath his usual steel resolve. Lyrian could feel it, though. That tiny moment of doubt. The thought that maybe, just maybe, he had made a mistake. But she knew better. She stepped forward before she even realized what she was doing. It's me. Both of them turned to her. Lyrian swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep her voice steady. If they had the chance to tag someone, they would have tagged me. I was the one in their hands the longest. I was the one they planned to sell. Mara frowned. That would mean. Lyrian reached up and touched the metal collar still fastened around her throat. The air in the cockpit went completely still. Mara's boots slid off the console. Shit, Stu moved first. He was already pulling out his knife before he spoke. We need to get that off. Lyrian took a step back, pure instinct. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up, and suddenly the memory was there. Hands grabbing her, forcing her down, cold steel against her throat. She barely managed to suppress the flinch, but Stu noticed. He stopped mid-step, didn't move closer, didn't push. His gray eyes locked onto hers, steady and unreadable. It's okay. Lyrian's pulse pounded in her ears. It wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. But she forced herself to nod anyway. Because she trusted him. She shouldn't, but she did. She took a slow breath and tilted her chin up, exposing her throat. Do it. Stu didn't hesitate. He stepped closer, moving carefully, deliberately slow. Lyrian clenched her fists as he reached up, the tip of his knife sliding beneath the collar. The metal was cold against her skin. Or maybe it was his fingers brushing her jaw that made her shiver. He was so close. She could feel the heat of him, the quiet control in his every movement. He wasn't like the others who had touched her before. There was no cruelty in his grip, no dominance, no ownership, just careful precision. The blade scraped against the locking mechanism, and for a brief second, the collar tightened around her throat. Lyrian sucked in a breath, her body tensing on pure reflex. And then it was gone. The weight that had been a part of her for years hit the floor with a dull metallic thud. Lyrian let out a shaky exhale. She reached up, touching the bare skin of her neck. She expected to feel pain, pressure, something. But there was nothing. Nothing but the warmth where Stu's fingers had just been. She looked up. Stu was still watching her. He hadn't stepped back. Hadn't moved at all. She should have pulled away. Should have put space between them. But she didn't. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of someone standing close. She was afraid of him moving away. Stu's gaze flickered, just a flicker, barely noticeable. But she saw it. Then, too fast, he stepped back, clearing his throat. You okay? Lyria nodded. She wasn't sure if it was the truth. Mara let out a dramatic sigh. Great. So now that we've handled that, can we focus on the imminent death part? Lyrian blinked, the moment shattering as reality came crashing back in. Right? They were still being hunted. Stu ran a hand through his hair, already back in problem-solving mode. What's our status? Mara flipped a few switches, her eyes darting over the screen. Tracker's disabled, but they still have our last known location. We need to drop out of hyperspace and change course now, or they'll predict our trajectory. Stu nodded. Where's the closest safe zone? Mara scoffed. You're assuming we have a safe zone. Stu shot her a look. Mara sighed. Fine. There's a station in the Varen Drift. Not exactly legal, but it's out of our YX cartel's jurisdiction. Stu glanced at Lyrian. You good with that? Lyrian blinked at him. You're asking me? He frowned slightly. Yeah. She hadn't expected that. No one had ever asked her opinion before. She squared her shoulders. Then let's go. Mara let out a low whistle. Well, look at that. We got ourselves a fighter. Lyrian didn't look away from Stu. I always was. Stu's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Then he turned back to Mara. Set the course. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, the stars snapping back into place around them. Lyrian exhaled slowly. For the first time, she wasn't a prisoner. She wasn't a runaway. She was choosing her path. And she wasn't alone. The Varendrift station was nothing like Velker. It was still rough, still soaked in the scent of unwashed bodies, cheap alcohol, and engine fuel, but it didn't hum with the same kind of danger. There were no slavers prowling the corridors, no desperate, hollow-eyed prisoners in cages. No one looked at Lyrian like she was property. For the first time, no one was hunting her. The realization sat heavy in her chest as she followed Stu through the dimly lit marketplace. The station was small and forgotten, a smuggler's rest stop hidden in the gravitational pull of a dead planet. The kind of place no one came unless they had nowhere else to go. Stu moved with his usual ease, blending into the crowd without effort. Lyrian was still adjusting. She found herself constantly glancing over her shoulder, half expecting a heavy hand to clamp down on her arm, expecting someone to drag her back into the nightmare she had just escaped. But no one did. No one even looked at her. She wasn't sure what to do with that. They passed a vendor selling refurbished clothes, and Stu stopped without a word. He ran his fingers over a simple gray tunic, checking the seams, before pulling it from the rack. Then he grabbed a pair of dark, sturdy pants and turned to her, holding them out. Lyrian blinked at him. Stu sighed. Take him. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the fabric. Why? He frowned, like the question confused him. Because you need them. That wasn't an answer. Not the one she was expecting, anyway. She took the clothes carefully, the weight of them strange in her hands. She hadn't chosen what she wore in years. The idea that she could just have something without being given orders first felt too big, too foreign. She swallowed hard, gripping the fabric. Thanks. Stu nodded, already turning to pay the vendor. Lyrian studied him as he handed over the credits. He had spent more than she knew he needed to. He could have gotten her something cheaper, something that barely held together. But he hadn't. He hadn't said anything about it either. He never did. She wasn't sure why that made her chest feel tight. Later, after she had changed, after the grime and the weight of Velker had been scrubbed from her skin, they sat together in a quiet corner of the station's cantina. The lights were dim, the air thick with the scent of strong liquor and fried food. The voices around them blended into a low, steady hum. Unfamiliar people talking about unfamiliar things. Lyrian had never sat in a place like this before. She had never been allowed to just sit. Stu was across from her, sipping something dark and bitter. He looked comfortable here, like the weight of the past few days hadn't touched him. But she knew better. He was always watching, always waiting for the next fight. Lyrian stared at her untouched drink, turning the glass between her hands. How long will we stay here? Stu shrugged. Couple days, maybe. Depends. On what? He met her gaze, his gray eyes sharp but not unkind. On you. Lyrian's breath caught. On her. The weight of those words settled over her like something heavy and unexpected. She had never been the one to decide before. The realization left her feeling unsteady. Stu must have seen something on her face because he leaned forward slightly, his voice quieter. You don't have to figure it out right now. Lyrian exhaled slowly, pressing her fingers against the cool glass. I just don't know what comes next. Stu nodded like he understood, like he'd been here before. You're not alone in that. She looked up at him, searching his face for something she didn't have a name for. And you? What about me? You helped me escape. Her voice was soft but steady. But you didn't have to. So what now? What happens to you? Stu tilted his head slightly, studying her like she was a puzzle he was still trying to figure out. Guess that depends too. On. A small smirk pulled at his lips. On you. Lyrian's pulse jumped. She didn't know how to respond to that. Didn't know how to process the way he was looking at her. Like she was someone worth waiting for. Like she was his choice. Her fingers tightened around her glass. That's not fair. Stu arched a brow. Why? She swallowed. Because I don't even know who I am outside of all of this. His smirk faded. He leaned back slightly, fingers tapping against his glass. Then he said, "Then we'll figure it out. Not you. Not me. We." Lyrian's throat tightened. She wasn't sure why that one word made her chest feel too full. Later, as they walked back to the ship, the station quieter now under dimmed lights, Lyrian let herself breathe. The air was cold against her skin, but it didn't bite like Velker had. There was no weight pressing down on her, no chain around her throat. Stu walked beside her, his steps slow, unhurried. For once, neither of them were running. She glanced at him, at the way he moved, steady, reliable, something solid in the chaos of her world. She didn't think before she reached out. Her fingers brushed against his hand, light, tentative. Stu stilled. For a second, she thought he might pull away. But then, slowly, carefully, he turned his hand over, letting their fingers intertwine. Lyrian's breath hitched. He didn't say anything, didn't look at her. He just held on. And for the first time in her entire life, Lyrian knew what it felt like to be wanted without being owned. The feeling nearly brought her to her knees. She didn't pull away, and neither did he. Back when she stopped herself. She hated how easily the past still tried to claim her. Stu didn't rush her. He never did. She exhaled softer this time. I imagined they would feel bigger when I was finally free. But now that I'm here, she hesitated. Stu pushed off the wall, stepping closer. Close enough that she could feel his warmth at her back, though he didn't touch her. But now, she turned her head slightly, enough to catch the edge of his expression. There was no judgment there, no impatience. Just him, waiting. Lyrian's throat tightened. Now, I don't know what to do with it all. She had never been taught how to be free, how to exist outside of survival. But somehow he understood. Stu's voice was quiet when he spoke. You don't have to know. She let out a breath that felt heavier than she wanted it to. Then what am I supposed to do? He was closer now, close enough that she could feel his breath against her skin. Figure out. A pause. But then he didn't. Instead, he turned his hand, his fingers slowly, deliberately tangling with hers. Lyrian swallowed, her chest aching with something she couldn't name. She wasn't used to this. Wasn't used to the feeling of being wanted without being taken. Her voice came out softer than she expected. I want this. Stu's jaw tightened, his grip on her hand firm, steady, real. She could feel his hesitation, his restraint. He was holding himself back, not because he didn't want her, but because he did, and he was terrified of what that meant. Lyrian took another step forward, her free hand coming up, hesitating just briefly before she touched the side of his face. Stu's breath hitched. Her fingers traced the faint line of a scar along his cheek, the roughness of his unshaven jaw. She had never been allowed to touch before, had never been given the space to explore, to take her time. She felt his whole body go still beneath her touch. Any sign that she had changed her mind? She didn't. Instead, she whispered, "Stay with me." His eyes darkened, and then he did. Later, when they lay tangled together, skin against skin, the weight of space pressing quiet around them, Lyrian traced lazy circles against Stu's chest. He was warm, solid, hers. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Because now, she wasn't just surviving. She was living, and she wasn't doing it alone. Stu's arm tightened around her, his lips brushing against her temple. A promise, a choice, one they had made together. Lyrian melted into him, into the warmth of his hands as they slid to her waist, the strength in the way he held her without caging her in. She had never felt safe in someone's arms before, but she did now. And when she deepened the kiss, when she pressed closer, demanding more, he groaned softly against her lips, his control finally snapping. He backed her up slowly, guiding her toward the small cot in the corner of the room. But he didn't push, didn't rush. When the backs of her knees hit the mattress, she hesitated. Stu stilled immediately, his hands resting lightly on her waist, waiting. Always waiting. Lyrian looked up at him, her heart pounding. She had been used before, had been forced into things she hadn't chosen. But this was different, because she wanted this. She wanted him. She reached for him again, fingers curling in his shirt, pulling him closer. His breath was ragged as he searched her face, waiting for any sign of hesitation. You don't have to do it alone. Something shifted in her chest. For so long, she had been waiting for the moment when she would finally feel safe. But maybe safety wasn't something that just happened. Maybe it was something you chose. And right now, she wanted to choose this. She turned to face him fully. Stu didn't move, didn't break the space between them. But there was something different in his gaze now. It was still steady, still unwavering. But there was heat there too. A heat that sent something dangerous curling low in her stomach. Lyrian's fingers twitched at her sides. She had never reached for someone before. Never wanted to. But she wanted to now. Her pulse pounded as she stepped forward, closing the small distance between them. Stu stilled, but he didn't stop her. Didn't pull away. Her fingers brushed his, testing, searching. His hand twitched, and for a second, she thought he might retreat. That he might pull back because this was too much, too fast. Like no one had ever touched him like this before. She let her thumb brush against his cheekbone, her gaze searching his. Do you want this? His exhale was sharp. Lyrian. It wasn't a no. It was something else. Something breaking. She felt it before she saw it. The moment he let go of whatever was holding him back. Because then he moved, his hand slid up her arm, over her shoulder, fingertips grazing the side of her neck. A slow, careful touch, as if he was memorizing the feel of her. Lyrian's breath caught. She had spent so long being handled, controlled. But this wasn't taking. This was giving. Stu's fingers tightened slightly, like he needed the confirmation that this was real. Then, finally, he kissed her. It wasn't hurried. It wasn't desperate. It was slow, careful, intentional. Like he wanted to make sure she knew this was a choice. That it was hers. The ship drifted in the quiet void of space, wrapped in the soft blue glow of hyperspace. Inside, the hum of the engines was steady, rhythmic, something familiar, something grounding. But for once, Lyrian wasn't listening. She stood at the viewport, her gaze locked on the endless stars stretching into infinity. She had spent so many years dreaming of this, of freedom, of escape, of a future that wasn't dictated by chains and cages. And yet, she had never imagined what came after. A soft shuffle of movement behind her made her pulse skip in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She didn't turn. She didn't have to. She could feel him. Stu. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, his presence solid, certain, real. He had always been that, steady in a world that had never given her anything but chaos. But there was something different tonight. Lyrian swallowed hard, fingers tightening against the cool metal railing. I used to think about the stars, she murmured.